We have two guests in the studio. Kathleen Michelle Godfrey is the chairperson of the Youth Advisors to Africa Scout Committee 2018-2022. She also has another long title. She's the chair of the 9th Africa Scouts Youth Forum.
Well, title isn't everything.
Title isn't everything, eh? This everything is a title. Grace Wanjakamau is a senior assistant scouting development at the World Scout Bureau Africa Support Center. Title isn't everything. It's just something.
Yes.
Good morning, ladies.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Welcome to the hot seats of the Situation Room. We want to understand the two conferences that we're talking about, the Africa Youth Scouts Youth Forum and the conference. But let's go back into the organization that you represent. So there's a whole Scouts movement across the world. Are there different factions within the Scouts movement across the world? Or is it the same one Scouts movement globally?
I think it depends what you mean when you say factions. So for us, Scouting is an organization that promotes active citizenship in young people and promotes this core set of values, a certain kind of ability to put your ideas into motion and to really take part in what's happening in the world around you and in your community. So across the world, those principles, those values, they're all the same. We have, of course, in every country, every community, groups that coordinate that and make sure that that's happening. But I think I probably wouldn't use the word factions for that.
Okay. You see, just like I'm looking at it from the Red Cross. There's the International Committee of the Red Cross. Then there are the National Red Cross organizations. There's the Red Crescent. All those. So when it comes to Scouts, do you have a global umbrella body and then national bodies? Do you have global umbrella bodies and national bodies? That's what I'm asking, Grace.
Yes, we do have that. For example, right now here in Kenya, we do have the Kenya Scout Association. This is the body that governs and also supports any operations and the scouting in Kenya. My office supports 40 countries in Africa. And then from that is what we form Scouting in Africa, Scouting in the Africa region. We do have Scouting in the Eurasia region, in the Europe region, in the Inter-America region, in the APR region. So yes, we do have different countries that come together as national scout organizations. Yes.
Can we sum it up to say it's a big world, so we need some moving parts?
Right. Yeah.
I want to get back to basics, really. What is the scouting movement? Yes, you've given a summary of what it does, active citizenship, and so forth. I would even ask you what that means. But what is it intended for? When was it started? Who started it? Why did they start it? And why is it a worldwide movement?
Okay.
Well, I can start off by saying it was started many years ago in 1907, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, by a man named Baden-Powell. But, with anything that we call a movement, as our one chair likes to say, a movement should move. Okay. So as the years passes, we move, we develop, we grow, we learn new things.
And so this is also contributed with anything we are working on. So for example, if you are a listener and you are a scout in the 90s, if you're listening to what we're doing right now, you'll notice there's a bit of a difference in it. So we do keep on changing with the youth trends, but one of the things that we mainly maintain on is the values of our founder, Robert Baden-Powell.
What are these values?
Well, it's about being kind to others, being kind to animals, being active in your community, being honest. Really, I would say you can sum it up as those core values that when we think of a good person who is able to take their ideas and move forward with them, those are really the core values that we build our movement around and we hope to spread within society.
Okay. Can we make is there a connection then between this and what we see in schools, whereby we have, I believe it's once a week, where the scouts within school are dressed in the uniform and they're doing certain activities. So the direct connection between what you're doing and then also what is happening in schools. And can you draw that for us?
Yes. So we have different contexts on how scouting runs in different countries. Let me give a context of here in Kenya. We have scouting, school-based scouting, and we have community-based scouting. So that's how you're able to see school-going children are able to wear their uniforms, and throughout the week you'll see some raising their flags, but then you'll see some taking part in community activities. So they are able to identify this is what we want to work on, and then we give them a program that guides them in that. So community-based scouting is one that is not centered with a school. So we can have church sponsored, we have media houses sponsored. So there's always something. We always do have a scout group attached either to a church, to a local government. There is a way that they are all connected. Does that answer?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
So now, what essentially we're looking at is in building some of these, virtues, some of these values that you'll be able to carry on with you, throughout life.
Yeah.
So how then? If we stick with the school, how then do you carry that through outside of school? What happens? Because then you're done with your primary school. And then we still then through onto high school. I believe Kalonzo Musyoka is the patron, for example, of the Scouts movement in Kenya. How then do you see that carry through into adulthood, taking those values with you?
Okay, I'll give an example with myself. I joined Scouting in 2003. We have an age section in Kenya called the Sungura Scouts. Then there is Chipkizi, then there is Mwamba, then there is Rover. So in these different age groups, we do have activities that help this young person to grow into a specific thing. Let me give an example with environment and sustainability. So at a very young age, you're introduced to what is the environment. You're taught, what do you notice in the environment? What do you feel is not so good? And then I come in at the age of, let's say, Chipkizi, and I tell you, then there are some of the needs you need to work on. Let me use a particular program. Right now, we do have the Plastic Titaners Challenge. This is a challenge that we're really trying to have young people be very keen and aware of their daily habits when it comes to the usage of plastic. So a young person, a young child, let's say below 9, starts to see it's not about plastic. So what plastics do you use in the house? How often do you use this plastic? Then at an later age, we now tell you is that, can you audit your plastic habits and let's find alternatives? Because you're all, with how we grow, we consumed with the habits we have around us. So with that, we try and make sure that every young person who goes through the learning process, by the time they get to the Rover stage, they're able to understand it is my responsibility to audit how I use the plastic. And why am I doing this? It's because we have a need in our environment, a need in our community. And so we even start with now the conversation of a green economy, which we start with people who are above the age of 18. Yeah.
I think there's also a lot that you can say there around what we call non-formal education and peer-to-peer learning.
Yeah.
Because when you have someone taking part in education, not in a classroom, not having a lecture, not with homework assignments, but really learning from what they are doing and doing it with other people of their age group, it also instills this sense of leadership and this growing leadership ability. Because from a young age, you're taught that you drive your future, you drive your ideas, and that everyone has a part to play in the achievement of those ideas. And as you grow forward, as you become more experienced and you learn more things, you have an even greater ability to drive those initiatives and those ideas and really put them into action. And I think that's not always something that youth have available to them in society, is that avenue for really having that idea and putting it into play.
Right.
Once upon a time, I remember the scouting movement wasn't the scouting movement, it was Boy Scouts. And then there were Girl Guides. What happened? I mean, everybody joined the Scouts and everybody became Scouts, or how did this turn out?
So we have the Scouts and the Girl Guides.
Oh,
Yes.
we still have Girl Guides, yeah?
We
You
do.
still have Girl Guides. And
So it's no longer just Boy Scouts, it's Scouts.
No, they're two separate bodies, but we are sister movements.
All right.
So
Explain
there's
to-
Boy Scouts and Scouts.
No, there is Scouts and then there's Girl Guides. So in
Okay.
Scouts, it's open to both boys and girls. Okay. Then in Girl Guides, we do have a predominantly female members.
So we say the Girl Guides are our sister organization, and they do present quite similar value-based codes, but we have slightly differing programs and coordination. And it's also it can depend on your country.
Yeah.
So, for example, countries based on their context have integrated with a male and female at different points in time. But in Africa, the majority of countries have both boys and girls joining the Scouts and just girls able to join the Girl Guides at the moment.
Okay.
And I can think, let me give a context. I do understand, but earlier, yes, in Kenya, we mainly used to have Boy Scouts. But after some time, there was an evolution to involve more, to have the ladies join the movement. So we do have the two movements running concurrently in Kenya and in many parts of the world.
And if I can just say, for me, I think the integration is really wonderful. For example, I went to an all-girls school. So the opportunity I had to learn how to work with people of both genders and people of many different cultures was really valuable for me going forward into life in general.
How widespread is the movement in Kenya, and then looking at, the region and then Africa? And I ask that because of these values that you're talking about. When we go into a situation, for example, like what we've just come out of in Kenya today, the question then is, where have values played in decision making? So let's go back to the question. How far spread is the movement in Kenya?
We are currently working with around 2 million plus here in Kenya. That is both the Scouts and the people who support them, they're called Scout leaders.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
And they are available in all the 47 counties. Yes.
Is there a census that's conducted to know the number of active Scouts in a country at any given time? The number of Scouts who are, post-school, because that's where they're very, very active.
Yeah.
So the post-school Scouts, for example, do we know how many we have in Kenya and what they're doing?
I don't have an exact number, but I do know that we have Scouts mainly in most of the universities and colleges and TVET institutions.
And beyond that. So once they graduate out of school, what is the expectation for a Scout?
So the good thing with Scouting, it's always more of a home. So you're taken through the system, and by the time you're hitting 26, you're already inducted into being a Scout leader. So we use your skill. So what happens, the times we may lose out someone, maybe when they get into the workplace, but they always find a way of coming back into Scouting. Yeah. So maybe back to your question on how we get the numbers is that we do have a members portal. And every year, each National Scout organization does upload their numbers. They do have their different ways on how they do capture their numbers. I think it would be best, for example, for Kenya, we can visit their website and find out how they capture their numbers.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the way you have, you engage. And I'd assume one of the things that you use to engage is meetings, conferences, and fora, right?
Yeah.
The 9th Africa Scout Youth Forum. And then there's the 18th Africa Scout Conference. So first, what's the forum and what's a conference?
Well, the Youth Forum is really one of the mechanisms by which we want to promote meaningful youth involvement in decision making and in governance. Because as a youth organization, young people, not only in Scouting, but in society in general, they want to have a voice in the direction of the things that they are involved in. So the Youth Forum is really our platform to specifically hear from the youth in the region who are representing their various National Scout organizations and really put forward recommendations that the conference should consider on the way forward, as well as hear some information and receive some education on things like this year we had entrepreneurship, for example, innovation, sustainable development. So they receive both enrichment and the decision-making input. And they also can engage in the fellowship between the different countries and network with each other as well.
So the Scout Youth Forum has already taken place.
Yeah, we
Where was
concluded
it?
yesterday.
Where was it?
It was in Karen.
At Don Bosco, Youth
Okay.
Educational Services.
And it brought together youth from across the continent.
Yes.
How many participated? What was the program like? What were the resolution? Was there a current declaration of 2022?
So I can say yes to all of the above. So we had various recommendations, some to do with including youth engagement in governance in specific ways, some to do with promoting specific programs that involve youth priorities like entrepreneurship, like the environment. And we also did have a declaration that was voted on and unanimously passed yesterday evening. And in terms of participants, we had voting presence from 30 National Scout organizations in the region this year. And most of those delegates will go on to form part of the Africa Scout Conference delegations and continue their input into the decision making there.
Tell us a bit more about the declaration. What was the declaration and how binding is it?
Well, there were a few parts to our declaration, mainly the recognition of how youth involvement in governance is something that should be really, truly meaningful and never subjected to what we would say tokenism or treated frivolously. Because as a youth organization and as youth in society, there's really a need to actively include youth in those decision-making processes. There was also some recognition of work that's been done in the past 4 years by the organization, because 4 years ago we had a different youth forum with its own recommendations, and we also track progress on how things are going with the implementation of that. So there was some recognition of work that was done there, and really a call to leadership within the region to continue with those processes, continue developing and growing, and continue to move and involve young people in the decision-making processes and in educating them on really what is happening in society and what the future is bringing for us.
Sounds like it expects governments to listen and take action, as you recommend. So who takes this declaration to the government and who follows up?
So the declaration is passed on to National Scout organizations. So we are, one, imploring National Scout organizations, and two, they do pass some responsibility to us in the region. So what we do, we go to the conference, all this has passed. So when we start out our new triennium, we follow up with the recommendations and resolutions passed by the forum. Okay? Can I give a context?
Please.
Yeah.
Yeah?
With government.
With government.
Yeah.
Okay,
Because if
let
you're
me
talking about youth being involved in decision making in governance, there's the government. You are not government. So
Yes.
you must engage with government at some point.
Let me give a context. So we had noticed that in most National Scout organizations, their leadership is mainly dominated by adults. We wanted young people to have a feel of, and even for their inputs to be heard. So they did pass a resolution some time back to ensure that each National Scout organization adopts a young person in their National Scout board. So when the decision came to our side, all national organizations agreed to work on that. So in the next 3 years, we continually monitored, has each of the 40 NSOs in Africa followed up in this decision. Following up with governments, we noticed that in different Scout organizations, they partner differently with government. So for example, a Scout from Chad, the National Scout Organization of Chad, will go to their government and say, this is one of the areas we are prioritizing on, and we have passed that we really want to include more young people in our board. So let's say when it comes to being seconded from maybe the government side, they can add one more young person. It also comes in through elections, because they do have elective posts for National Youth Forum chairs and also people who are part of the board as a young person. So this is where they now involve their government on the works they're doing. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
If I
Yes, it
can
does.
add a little bit there as well, I think it's really important to note that Scouting as a movement is an apolitical organization.
Yeah.
And that's really, really important, because what that means is, because we have an impact on the lives of so many young people across the region, we are able to advocate for certain things and to, when given the opportunity, to give input into policy such as things on the environment, things on youth and leadership, things in civil society, and also promote things like peace and peaceful transitions outside of our movement, because we don't specifically align to certain political parties or also religious groups. So for us, it's really a space of how can we really cohesively bring forward the views that we should be promoting as a society? And can we promote that inclusion into policy on a broader scale as well?
Okay. Let's take a break on this point, and then we'll talk about the Scout Conference and the difference between Scouts Forum and the Scouts Conference, which are taking place around the same time, in the same year, in the same places. Okay, we are having a conversation about the scouting movement globally. Kathleen Godfrey is the chair of the Youth Advisors to Africa Scouts Committee and also chair of the 9th Africa Scouts Youth Forum. Also joining us in the studio is Grace Kamau, Senior Assistant for Scouting Development at the World Scout Bureau Africa Support Center. Kenya's biggest conversation takes a break.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
Our guests, Kathleen and Grace from the Scouts Movement, still here with us in the studio. Eric Latif, Nduoko, and CT Muga. Tell us now about the conference, the 18th Africa Scout Conference.
So, as you can tell, because we had the 9th Youth Forum and the 18th Conference, the conference is a decision-making body that's been around for quite a bit longer than our Youth Forum. And every 3 years, we gather in a different location, and delegations from our member organizations come forward and have their say in our decision-making processes, and also elect new people into certain leadership positions, as well as choose the venues for the upcoming events in the next 3 years.
So when is the conference taking place? Has that taken place as well?
We'll begin tomorrow with that.
Still in Nairobi,
Yes.
bringing together the same delegation that was in the forum?
Well, it will include those from the forum, but for the Youth Forum, member organizations can send 2 delegates. For the conference, they can send up to 6, which should include, ideally, their youth delegates as well. So we'll see a number of new arrivals today for the conference that starts tomorrow, partly the same people and partly some additional individuals as well.
What are some of the key areas that will be focused on during this conference, and what are some of the things that you're saying, absolutely have to be addressed? Because, I mean, obviously, conference people are then coming, taking, and then going back and plugging into their communities, right? But what are some of the things that, will be coming out during this conference?
We want to fast track the solutions around the COVID-19 implications. So that will be one of the things that will be keenly discussed during the conference. Yeah.
Okay.
I think we also have a bit of a focus on what we call safe from harm, which is really ensuring that every member organization is setting a really good standard in keeping young people that are part of our movement safe. So there'll be a big focus on that during this conference, as there was in the previous conference. And also just generally governance tools and standards that we have across our organization to help the understanding of those tools and the implementation of those tools.
Okay. So is impact felt amongst young people who are not necessarily in the movement?
I love that question. Thank you for asking that question. I think I'm not sure how familiar you are with the SDGs, but I always say my favorite sustainable development goal is partnership, because we should never be doing anything by ourselves. So not only do we as the Scout movement have our activities that we do within society, we also partner often with other youth organizations, other educational organizations to spread that impact more broadly. But in addition to that, even if you're not specifically a Scout, you may attend a scouting activity or benefit from a scouting program in the short term, which will in some way have an impact on you going forward, even if it's just that you learn something new on a given day.
So in our activities, yes, we do have non-scouts who are part of us. And nowadays, we don't want to say non-scout, we want to say young people. So we do have the scouts who are the main beneficiaries. Then we do work closely with our communities and with our partners. So it is all an intertwinement. In one way or another, you'll be able to find a link somewhere with scouting. And yes, especially we have a big focus with the Scouts for SDGs mobilization, because we really want every National Scout organization to take the challenge on and solve the challenges they have in their community. At times we do have the same challenges, but they're different contexts. really vary with the different countries. So this will be our push to ensure that all of us are creating an impact in our communities. We do have examples of activities they can do, but we really want the National Scout organizations to own it and to fly with it. Yeah.
If I can add, we say if you see a problem in your community, you should do what works to help solve that community. And if your scouts are doing what works, the impact cannot help but be felt by others in the community because steps are being taken to impact that problem. And each small step, of course, adds upon each other, and eventually the problem will hopefully be resolved.
The mention of the conference, you said part of what the conference does, it looks at policy. So what sort of individuals come for this conference within the scouting movement?
So I don't want to bore you with a list of roles and specific...
Please bore me with the list.
Well, it can vary. Of course, each member organization makes a specific decision. But you could have, for example, some will send chief scouts, some will send CEOs, some will send chief commissioners, international commissioners. So it tends to be people that really have a strong leadership role within the organization and have a lot of impact on the direction that the National Scout organization is taking.
Okay, now there was mention of policies that decisions that you had arrived at, where you were focusing and insisting on young people being involved.
Yes.
Are young people involved in this conference?
So they absolutely are. The delegates from the Youth Forum will join their delegation teams at the conference, and their opinions, their goals, their priorities will be included in the voting process by those delegations. So if you have a delegation of 6, most likely 2 of those will be your delegates from the Youth Forum, forming part of that core decision-making team at the conference as well.
So what you're saying is that the majority of people who are in this decision and policy-making process are people who are not necessarily youth. And yet the membership of the scouting movement is predominantly youth. Now, is this a fair distribution, really?
I think for us, it's a growth point. We are continually growing and improving. I also maybe just want to highlight, not every National Scout organization will have 6 individuals in their delegation. So, for example, I can give you Lesotho Scout Association, their young lady who is a delegate for the Youth Forum. She is also the only delegate that will represent that Scout Association at the conference. So that youth delegate will be the only individual making those decisions on behalf of her whole National Scout organization. And it's not the only case, just an example. And for example, Scout South Africa as well, they will be sending their chief commissioner, and they had 1 youth delegate. So it will be those 2 making the decisions at the conference on behalf of the National Scout organization.
See, where my mind went to when you first mentioned the inclusion of youth and the deliberate effort to do so was continuity.
Yes.
And inducting young people into leadership roles and positions at an early age.
Yes.
And that probably means immersing them into decision-making processes so that they can actually see and understand how it is made. I also understand that many people who are in these higher positions were once youthful scouts. I understand it.
Yeah.
But if more and more youth or young people are not involved in the process, the process of cascading some of these values, in my mind, is slowed down just a wee bit.
I think it's a fair point. I also just think that it's also part of the reason for the existence of the Youth Forum itself. Because the process that we follow at the Youth Forum, when we introduce recommendations onto the floor, when we vote on them, when we amend them, it's the self-same process that we follow at the conference. And those recommendations from the Youth Forum are moved to the floor of the conference as a whole. So even aside from being involved in your specific delegation, you have your additional input from the Youth Forum, and you've experienced this full educational process and governance process from the preceding event, which then passes on to the next event as well. And that's not only at the Africa level. Many of our National Scout organizations have this happening at their national levels or their provincial levels as well with youth forums and conferences.
I can also come in with that. For the last 3 years, we have had one of the youngest chairperson of the Africa Scout Committee. So it has been a process. So once it was passed, we started seeing the change. So that was the first time we had a person under 35. His name is Victor Tipaga, who is the current chair of the Africa Scout Committee. We have also seen a change with a young person also leading WASOM in general. We have a secretary in general who is Ahmed, also a young person who is leading the organization.
How old is Ahmed?
I will find out how old he is, but he is he's in his 30s. He's in his 30s. I don't have the exact figure.
I want to hear of people in their 20s.
In their 20s?
Yes, for me, that now you would be talking about a genuinely young person. But I presume by the time you're 30 in the organization, you started off in leadership positions at a younger age.
Yes.
And you've grown to the point where now you can actually get to this. Is my assumption correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
I can also add that we have the youth forum chair for Kenya is also is around 24.
Good.
I was
Good
also
age.
part of the National Scout Board, and that time I was in the age group of 21 to 24. Then
Even
I left.
better.
Yes.
And you can say both of us here today, we're still in our 20s.
20s.
That
as
is
well.
that is excellent.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
How do you measure impact? How do you say that the work that you do year in, year out then is actually impacting lives? Because that is it at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
How do you look at communities and say, yes, because of 1, 2, 3 interventions or 1, 2, 3 things that we've done beyond school going age, that this is actually succeeding?
We have a platform called the scout.org. So this is a site that scouts upload the activities they're doing in their community. I will give an example with the Kenyan context. They're just from the electioneering process. They had a campaign called Form Me Peace and has been running for a year now. It is now more than a year. And their main initiative was to reach out to young people who are above the age of 15 and to the age of 26, imploring to them that form the peace. So how would they do this? They did come activities in their schools and in their universities, and all this was aimed at, yes, we do have conflicted opinions, but what does that doesn't mean we have to conflict it in every time. So what happens if in your area there's a challenge coming in? We want you to be part of the conversation, that we can have differing political opinions. So we are able to measure this by seeing one of the numbers that are reported. So we're easily able to account how many people were part of this and how the coverage they had. So we had a few of them. I can see a lot of stories from the media side for Kenya Scouts, and it can be attested with the main areas where they have scouts that the Form Me Peace campaign was actually quite successful.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I think there's also part of it of when you implement a project, what you are also doing at the closing stages of that project, or if it's an ongoing project at regular intervals, you're getting feedback from the participants in that project as to whether it had an impact and what kind of impact it had. And another metric we use is also how sustainable is your project. And I don't only mean here environmental sustainability, although there are many environmental projects. I also mean sustainability over time. So if you introduced a project, is there a long-term plan for the impact that that project will have? And how is it going to do that? Who is going to take over once you move to something different? And so on and so forth. So we do encourage metrics and tracking and impact tracking across our organization in that way as well, both in terms of projects implemented by members of Scouting, and also in terms of, say, as an example, things that were resolved on at the conference. Those are also tracked, and KPIs are developed to say, did we do what we set out to do? And is it a long-term impact that this has had?
So do you plug into existing issues? Let's say Kenya Scouts, for example, do you plug into existing issues, or do you then come and introduce issues and say, this is what we feel that we should, deal with this year? I mean, for example, there was a huge issue this year in the country with youth being involved in the electoral process, all right? Whether it was a registration with IEBC and things like this, and probably will be a continuing issue for years to come. So do you plug into issues like that, or do you come and introduce issues and say, this is what we will focus on this year?
We focus our interest with the needs that are in the country, and we don't introduce new things.
Okay.
So, for example, each country feels their country, what is actually happening, and what resolve can we bring on board, or what initiative can we bring to work on this. So I do know that Kenya Scouts did not work alone in this campaign. They had a few partners with them, and I know they were developing for this initiative for a longer time.
Yeah.
For example, sometime back also we had the campaign that the president, Uhuru Kenyatta, was leading about the planting trees. So I remember they had partnered with Kenya Forest Service. They also had Girl Guides on board. So everyone was bringing in to answer to that need. So it's not something new. They answer what is current in their country.
Yeah.
But there's something that you also said, that the Scouts movement is apolitical. So does that mean that you would not engage in issues, for example, like mobilizing the youth and sensitizing the youth on elections and registration as voters and turning out to vote?
So when we say we're apolitical, what we mean is we don't endorse or support a specific political party or candidate. So we will never go out and say, as a movement, this is our choice for this election or this specific issue. What we will do is promote causes that lead to active youth participation, such as registering to vote, such as promoting peace during elections, because those aren't issues that tie to a specific candidate. These are issues of importance in society as a whole.
Right.
That we can say it's socially responsible for everyone who is eligible to vote.
So Kathleen and Grace, you both are in the leadership of the Scout movement. Is this a full-time job, or are you doing this part-time? Is this volunteerism? Are you employed?
So the answer to that is different for each of us. So I am in a volunteer position. So I work full-time in addition to my responsibilities with the organization. So I'm a volunteer, whereas the lovely Grace is a member of what we call the World Scout Bureau, which is the staff that support the running of the Scout movement as a whole. And in addition to the World Scout Bureau, there may be some staff members in national organizations for coordination. But it's worth noting that the numbers of staff are like a core team that provides support. And then there are a huge number of volunteers in addition to that that support the movement.
So how do you fund your programs? For example, how do you fund the operations of this core team? And how do you fund for example, the conference and the forum that you're holding?
Okay, so for the conference, the participants are paying for their own fees to come participate. Others have already partnered with different people. But mainly for our scouting activities, we do have partners. So we are able to establish, this is our focus point, environment and sustainability. So we do have a partnership team that goes out and looks for funds for us.
We also have our foundations. So we have the World Scout Foundation and the Africa Scout Foundation, whose role is really to mobilize support financially for our programs and our organizations so that we can continue to run as a movement and provide a high standard. Because if you look at scouting in Africa, we're 4.5 million or so. So there is some funding that is required to coordinate that, which is mobilized by our teams and then, of course, reported on as well.
Okay. So as you go through, we look at Kenya, we look at the region. If you're looking at the African continent, then in terms of impact, I'm talking about 4.5 million. Would you say that the activities that you can see happening in one country, for example, are replicated across the country, across the continent for further impact?
So absolutely. And I can give a really good example. We have a program called Food for Life, where we encourage young people to develop basic, shall I say, farming skills so they can grow their own food. And the manuals for that were developed, say, for example, within Scout South Africa, and then adopted by many, many countries across the Africa region and implemented there. And that's not the only case. So as an organization, we put a lot of focus on best practice. And when we have a best practice, we share that best practice, and the others tailor it to their context and their needs to improve situations and communities.
Are there instances where you borrowed something that was considered best practice, say from one country, then it's adopted by another country and it even outshines the original?
I think absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's difficult for me to give a specific example. I can give great examples of where we share programs, where we share best practices. But I think the reason why it's difficult for me to find an example is because at that point, it's because the organization has adopted it and made it its own. So I struggle to think of something.
So it's kind of different from the original.
Let me say not different, but what I strongly believe in is that you can't necessarily pick up something from here, put it here, and expect it to work in exactly the same way, because places have different contexts, different needs, and different systems. So what's really important for me is how do you tailor that practice or that program to really suit your needs so that it works very well in your context.
Okay. Can I also add?
Yes.
We do have programs. That's where mainly the World Scout Bureau is able to support in. We develop educational programs. I can give an example. We do have the Dialogue for Peace program. This is aimed at imploring every person to be a dialogical person. So we take you through the process. How are you able to identify a conflict that is upcoming? How are we able to de-escalate it? So this program is shared with with all the National Scout organizations. So I can tell you, like last year, the Dialogue for Peace program really did well in Uganda. They had a conflict that was arising even among themselves, even among communities. So that program was really taken up then. I have noticed this year during this electioneering process that in Kenya, also most of the young people are using that same educational program to propel the conversation about why we need to be more dialogical and choose that we are all here because we want to live, all of us here, and we want to promote peace. So the different programs take up different places. Like in Nigeria, it has also taken up quite well. South Africa this year have had very many young people coming on board, and we do it in small activities. So if I tell you dialogue, I want to go to a 6-year-old and tell them, I want to talk to you about dialogue. I'll find a fun activity and I'll ask them, when do you feel angry? What do you do when you feel angry? Your friend has come today and has talked ill about you. How do you do this and this? So we do come up with fun, short activities that everyone can learn that I am promoting. I want you to be a dialogical person. So from a very young age, by the time you're getting to 18 and getting to become an adult leader, we hope that is one of the skills that you already have as a person. Yeah.
Is it permissible for me to ask what your day job is?
Of course you may. So I work for a company called Accenture South Africa in our innovation and growth department. So I work on strategy and designing and launching products that work for the needs of humans. We call it human-centered design. So rather than saying, I think this thing will work, we go to the person who will use it and we say, does this work? And we test it and we see, can we implement it in a way that will be really successful for their needs? So that is my day job. But I can say the skills are very useful in my volunteer job as well.
And you also volunteer on an everyday basis, sort of. It sounds like you're volunteering every day. It's a lot of work to do, to coordinate all this, to be planning, for example, the forum, and then now thinking about planning the conference. As you conclude the conversation this morning, I'd like to give you the opportunity, Kathleen, to send out a message to the people that you expect to attend the conference. What is it that you'd like them to know, to come prepared with?
Well, my message to those attending the conference is always in the center of your mind and in the center of your heart as you make decisions that have such a far-reaching impact on our region, keep in your mind the young person that will be impacted by that decision at the end of the day. That young scout, that 6-year-old, that 11-year-old, whatever their age group is, keep them in your mind and make the decision for them, because that's why you're here. You're here to represent them and drive progress on their behalf. So if you keep them at the center, you will make a good choice for them.
Thank you very much. So this is an invite-only conference.
Yeah. Well, not invite only. They'll say all of our member organizations are invited, but they decide who
They
from their
choose
side will
who is
attend.
going to be representing their delegation.
Yes.
All right. Kathleen Godfrey is a chairperson of the Youth Advisors to Africa Scouts Committee between 2018 and 2022, and the chair of the 9th Africa Scouts Youth Forum that just concluded in Nairobi. And what is your role in the conference?
Well, in the conference, I will be presenting some workshops on standards, global standards, maybe a few constitutional amendments, just overall support.
Okay.
And
So you don't have a title. So the titles end here. Okay. And then Grace Kamau is a senior assistant scouting development at the World Scout Bureau Africa Support Center. Thank you very much, ladies, for joining us.
thank you for
Thank you for having
us.
us.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.